And can you?
All set, Ben?
Yeah, go ahead and start your video too, please.
Yeah, my video won't be on.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Bob Houtman with the U.S. National Science Foundation. I welcome everyone to the final plenary session of a very highly successful Ocean Best Practices System Marathon Workshop. Just a quick overview of the planned events. We'll start out with an introduction to the plenary session from Jay Pearlman. This will be followed by two segments. The first segment will be a 7-member panel in which each member will give a 2 to 3 minute overview of one significant topic from the workshop. We have a very limited amount of time available, so we will let each member speak before we have then 1 or 2 follow-up planned short interventions. We'll then move directly into the second segment, which will be a community discussion on key priorities and directions for the community and OBPS, and this will be led by Peter Pissierssens from IODE. So let's jump right into it, and I'll turn it over to Jay.
Thank you, Bob. Let me share my screen and be happy to provide an introduction. You should be seeing a presentation now that's being shared.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody, and I'd like to add my welcome to Bob's. This has been a very interesting and mind-expanding experience. I'd like to set a foundation initially. We in the OBPS put together a vision and then a way to reach that vision. The future vision is a future where there are agreed and broadly adopted methods across ocean research, operations, and applications. To achieve that, to reach that goal, we are looking to sustain an evolving system that fosters collaboration, consensus building, and innovation through a coordinated and global access to best practices and standards across all of the areas of the value chain, from detection and sensing to user applications. With that as a foundation, our goal is to serve the community, to serve you in meeting your own goals. There were a number of recurring themes which occurred in the workshop, and those are reflected from outputs of the working groups, from the polls that we did, and what they showed was a number of key areas that we need to address: interoperability, decision trees, outreach, training, technology, convergence of best practices and methods, intercomparison experiments, ethics, and the UN decade. These are complex issues. For example, in the decision tree, it's not clear whether it's the work of a user coming into the OBPS and knowing how to find the best practice, or whether it's the work in an application area of how a response manager would handle hurricanes, flooding, or other things. So the decision tree is a multiple thing, and needless to say, ethics, the UN decade, and all of the others are themselves also complex. To understand the priorities, we reached out to the working group leads. They gave us their 3 top priorities, their 3 top recommendations, which we put together in a table. And what we'd like to do now is move forward in discussing the various inputs from different perspectives. And as Bob said, we have a panel of people that are going to give us those summaries. I would like finally to look forward with you what's the near term and the intermediate term. Many of the ideas here will be discussed by the Ocean Best Practice System Steering Group in October for incorporation into the strategic plan. We're looking forward to that. We are interested in supporting the community and continuing the efforts and energies of the working groups. And so we're looking at availability of continued communication resources, whether that's through the forums that are part of OBPS or Slack channels or others. I think that will do with each working group. We recognize the value that the working groups have given and are beginning to look at the way to expand the OBPS to include some of these topics and some of the people to further the use of best practices across the global community. We're also looking at pilot demonstrations. For example, we're talking now with the Sargassum Working Group about a pilot for decision tree development. Other groups, the ocean acidification, are also interested in potential pilots. But what we need most is getting your continuing inputs for our developments in the repository, for training, for outreach, but also for collaboration. And that's what part of the discussions today are. What is the importance in the areas of developing best practices, and how can we as a team work with the community and the OBPS together? And I do encourage you, as we go through the next month or so, there will be interesting articles in our OBPS newsletter. Please subscribe or keep up to date there. Thank you very much. Bob, back to you.
Not sure why the machine went to mute, but thank you very much for that introduction, Jay. Let's move right into the first segment. We have a very august group of panel members, and as I mentioned, each has 2 to 3 minutes to cover their particular topic area. Let's go ahead and get started with Johannes Carstensen, Guillaumard, who's going to cover the topic of convergence.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Exactly, I'm representing here the working group moderators, which were Jules Hermes and Rebecca Ziton. And what we came up in this convergence and endorsement group was really that we realized that OBPS can do really a lot more on convergence and also on the endorsement process than we did so far. So far, we were mainly kind of counting on that the community itself is really creating, for example, the controlling the convergence process and setting up really community agreed documents, bring the whole process, run through the whole process. And we now identified many opportunities where really OBPS can also play a role. And that is, for example, search engine improvement. So there's technology actually being involved, which is our search technology that can be further expanded. And then there is another process here involved, which is really connecting the communities closer together. I think with this meeting, we also showed that already, that through the working groups and maybe continuation of these working groups, there is automatically also a kind of convergence process being done, supported. The other big topic is, of course, the endorsement. The endorsement is something that really was also very much emphasized in this working group, that endorsement creates trust, and trust in documents, trust in methods is what actually then determines if the community takes up what's being written there. And only if it's being uptaken, we can ensure that there's a wide use, which at the end then really brings the interoperability of observations and of methods that we wish to get. And so the endorsement can also be a lot more brought in prominently, for example, by also now getting a lot more players into the endorsement process, having other organizations being the endorsed organizations, and then trying to also expand that to make individual endorsements maybe more universal applicable. And I think with that, I leave it.
Okay, thank you very much, Johannes. Next up, we have Pierluigi Buttigieg from AWI on the topic of technology. Pierre.
Right, thank you, Bob. Yeah, so that was a very intense meeting, very interesting. And there are a few high-level take-home messages that I got from our technology, our data information group, but also as my role of leading the work package for technology implementation in the OBPS. The main thing, of course, across these working groups is to bring people together somehow. And for me, as a technologist, this means bringing people closer to machine intelligences, because the machines require a little bit of structure from us in order to help us do what we plan to do, to converge, to guide people through decision trees, to boost interoperability. So helping the community write and structure their documents that could evolve into best practices in a more machine readable way is a target. Bringing in code bases to the narrative documents that we write in words is also a target, as well as getting ready to bring in machine readable plans for automated devices. As the decade progresses, we will have much more automation, much more self-writing plans, if you will, and it's something to prepare for, but that's still a few steps ahead. But to prepare for that, it's also about how our community starts to structure their information to guide one another. So that was, on a technical side, quite important. That's going to guide us in terms of how we structure the OBPS to be more than a document archive and a search engine into something quite different and quite exciting. But one of the things that struck me the most was a intervention from Lauren Weatherden from WCMC, where she said, you know, put the knowledge first. It's important to know why we need data and information and indeed methodological knowledge. What's the point? And if we have that overlap of scientific observation, application, and societal goals, then we're in that realm of saying, all right, we understand where the data and information need to flow and where the methods need to converge. So that combination of bringing people together using technology, bringing people closer to the technology, and listening to the needs of the user community to help structure their technology are the three major takeaways that I have. Thank you, Bob. Back to you.
Thank you, Pierre. Next up, we have Claudia Delgado from IODE. She will be talking about the training topic.
Okay, thank you. So I will be indeed talking about the training topic. And I think perhaps the main conclusion, and for me the most striking one, was the fact that online training is now accepted as a good and a fit for purpose solution to address the training needs of the OBPS community. And this is in striking contrast with what was the community feeling less than 1 year ago. Then regarding specific conclusions of this working group, one of the main recommendations is to create dedicated training packages tailored to specific communities and addressing the different EOVs. And one example would be to create cheat sheets for each EOV and developed closely with the experts of each EOV panel and elaborating decision trees and so on. Another aspect that was discussed in this working group was, and very much in line with the online or distance learning, is exploring the possibility of using simulation environments and the virtual reality to enhance the distance learning experience and address training needs that under the current situation where we cannot really travel, or even for economical reasons, exploring the virtual reality as a training tool to decrease the costs for training. And these were the main conclusions of this working group. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Next up, Francois Pearlman, IEEE. Francois will talk about outreach and communications. Francois.
Thank you, Bob. As was mentioned a number of times during the workshop, the OBPS is a service provider to the community and the working groups. And that was reflected very much in the outcomes from the working groups. For example, there was mention of champions for the convergence area. There was also mention of enhancing the relationship between OBPS and, for example, the CLIVAR group having to do with quality assurance. And another area was communication of highly technical material and making that understandable to the various communities, as was mentioned in the data area. So we're very much looking forward to working with the communities and establishing some clear communications and exchange, both-way exchanges. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Francois. Cora Horstman from AWI will talk to us about engagement of early career professionals. Cora.
Thank you, Bob. And I also would like to start thanking the senior leads in this workshop, which were incredibly helpful for their support and their interaction on our intergenerational exchange. In fact, I also see the OBPS as a platform which can help to bring generations closer together, and that we can learn from previous mistakes and accelerate the process of co-development and co-design of methods and practices, which is connected to the vision and mission of Ocean Best Practices. The concept we had during this workshop, I see, was very beneficial and very successful, that the early careers supported the leads in their field of expertise. And I think this could also work for future working groups or for the work packages within the OBPS. It was raised in a lot of the working groups that there should be more community interaction, and training was also one of the major things which has been raised. And I think early careers can help building this, and also that what was in, I think, omics, that we had an in-person workshop or just for training, that it's for a specific user group. There can be trainings maybe specifically for early careers. And I was wondering also whether how we can better engage with the early career community, because there are so many platforms and resources and organizations out there that it's really hard to tell which ones are good and which are really helpful to implement your methods. So this could be something we can develop, but also to keep an early career community, besides having them supporting their working groups. We could also have an early career community, which is then going to conferences and reporting back to the community what they learned, to have this as a base. And I also think that it can be very beneficial two ways that you can integrate, for example, in university curricula, the OBPS, and then what Johannes just said with convergence and the issue tracker, and then we could implement like a flagging system, and students would be able to actually go through the documents and see whether they understand and test the methods, and report back whether there should be a version control or whether there should be an update and whether it's really understandable. So I think this has been a really successful workshop for us, and I learned a lot from my perspective, and I think my fellow early careers as well. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the future work.
Thank you so much, Cora. Mark Bushnell from IUSE on the topic of use cases and community engagement. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Bob. And I'm thinking of the day you introduced me to Jay Pearlman about 3 years ago in Monterey. So it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Excellent.
I've just got a few words to say about user community that I co-chair with Frank Muller-Carger, and then I'm going to pass it off to Frank to spend a minute or two on the Ocean Decade, potentially a large user community, I suppose. We put together the ocean uncertainty quantification because I'm engaged in that in 2 other efforts, and it's a great example of how you can leverage efforts through the ocean best practice system. We took advantage of this workshop to host our session. We're going to use the forum that I managed together with Raisa Meyer and Nick Roden. Thank them for their help, and encourage every of the working groups to consider using the forum, keep their efforts going. If you could, be sure to include me in let me know of your efforts so that I can keep track of them, because at the end of the year, we have to put a report together for the IOC and show them that we're actually earning our keep. Frank, with that, you want to say a few words about the Ocean Decade?
Yes, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Bob. First, I want to take a moment to thank Bob Houtman as one of the major sponsors of this workshop. Really, thank you very much. Coming from NSF and through the Ocean Ops Research Coordination Network, this has been great to have your support, Bob. So the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development starts next year in 2021. And the Ocean Best Practices System really is about partnerships and community engagement. And so it's aligned with the Ocean Decade. We need to make sure that this decade really addresses societal needs. And so this decade will bring a new paradigm on how we engage the community in a transdisciplinary manner, and other communities, and as Cora just mentioned, early career, indigenous people, people that are in developing nations, in a brand new way that can solve real problems. So the various themes that we discussed during the week of the OBPS, and the leads of those themes are going to be part of that, working with us through the OBPS system. So specifically, I think that as we engage with best practices on interoperability, on capacity building, on transfer of knowledge and technology, we will manage to bring this community together. And each of your themes contributes to this in this context. One thing that we will need to do is we will need to spend some time scoping the OBPS to make sure that that it will serve this broader community appropriately as the UN Decade moves forward. And so we need a more structured mechanism to engage people, those of you that have participated and those of you leading themes, to remain engaged with OBPS as we get into the decade. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark and Frank. I'd like to now give Michelle Barbier an opportunity to make a few comments on the topic of ethics.
Thank you, Bob. So we all want to have to adopt an ethical behavior and respect human freedom, dignity, equality and solidarity, citizen rights and justice. But how can we really implement these core values into the ocean observing system? So this is why we have designed 4 sessions. one dedicated to collaboration with indigenous people, one with collaboration with fishers, and another one of optimizing infrastructure. So these are 3 topics, but we could adapt to any other topics. So the 3 recommendations we would like to make is first is to define an ocean ops statement with the key core values defining the community values. So it's about respect different cultures and their values. It's about designing and execute the research activities that every party meet research their needs and they anticipate benefits. So we would like to have one of these ocean ops statement to come out. The second recommendation that has been agreed on among the participants is to develop a series of online ethics training courses that are more specifically dedicated to ocean observation and are not general to bioethics or to research integrity. And this should be maybe organized by topic, like collaboration with indigenous group or with fishermen. And it would be nice also to link these videos and courses with the existing online courses. And the third recommendation we started to work on maybe is to design an easy to use and intuitive flow chart that identifies the potential ethics issue related to proposed and existing research activities and which leads investigators to ethical recommendations related to these issues. And again, we have started to design this flowchart, need the participation of everyone, and the idea is to help you to identify where potentially there is a small or a bigger ethical issues and to help to find the best way to address these challenges.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Cora, could I now ask, was there an intervention that you still planned on indigenous community?
No, I didn't plan something specifically on indigenous communities, but
okay, yeah, I just wanted to check, make sure we didn't forget something that you had planned to do. Okay,
no.
Thank you all very much. This brings us to the close of session 1 and or segment 1. I'd really like to again thank all of our speakers for their summaries, and in particular also thank everyone for being very mindful of the time. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Peter for segment 2.
Okay, thank you. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening all. I have the dubious honor of now trying to pull all things together a little bit. So I'm just going to show you this. Jay already showed that slide, but it sort of gives the priority themes that were identified by the Atlantic group and by the Pacific group. Now, from that, we sort of identified 6 questions. The first one, what are the key additional capabilities for the repository, such as, for example, a more powerful search, multi-language support, or multicultural engagement? Secondly, how can the OBPS collaborate with and support the ocean observing and applications community? Third, what are the key areas for training in education online now? And how do we deal with regions of limited infrastructure? The fourth question is, what outreach would be the most effective? Community engagement of partnerships. The fifth, how should we implement new capabilities such as decision trees and best practice convergence? And finally, what aspects of global support should be engaged by the OBPS and the best practices more generally? Now, what I've done based on these questions, I've then looked at the spreadsheet that listed the 3 priority areas that were identified by each of the breakout groups, and I've tried to sort of put them together according to these questions. And so what I would like to do now is, we go through these together, and then you can make comments. You can say, okay, we should modify this a little bit. We need to add something. So we get to a more comprehensive and better summary of the next steps we need to take in terms of recommendations. Now, as we are about, I think, 75, and to avoid that everybody starts talking at the same time, well, we can't push on a button to raise your hand, but if you want to raise your hand, then just type H in the chat screen, and Nenad will then give you the floor to talk. So let's go to the first question, the key additional capabilities. The first one here was documents under the repository should be easily sorted, as there are a variety of documents in the repository and not all are protocols and procedures. We recommend a labeling process so there is a way to sort documents by category. And that came from the Sargassum group. And secondly, humanize the digital. First of all, highlight documents which show how data and information streams and holdings of varying quality and type can be efficiently channeled towards solving overlapping scientific questions and societal issues. The second one, elevate guidance on the communication of the highly technical to broader communities. And third, enhance the OBPS user interface to suggest linked data and information holdings and streams which may be relevant to a document being viewed. And that came from the data and information group. Third, digitize the human foci. First of all, upgrade through co-development and socialize the OBPS templates to have dedicated machine readable, mineable sections, capture what users care about or should be more aware of. Secondly, enhance the OBPS user interface to leverage these structures with natural language and semantic technologies to enhance search across OBPS holdings and fair data and information holdings and streams. That also came from the Data and Information Management Group. Then fourth, allow version updates of best practices based on feedback. Include a functionality where community members can comment or rate a best practice and a procedure for producing and approving updated versions. And that came from the Sargassum group. Finally, endorsement creates trust and thus uptake by the community. So enhance the visibility of endorsed documents through search functionality, newsletter articles, etc. And provide examples of how communities can endorse best practices, for example, hosting documents of endorsement processes and guidelines. So what about best practice must adhere to be endorsed? And
there is a hand from Johannes.
Yeah, Johannes?
Yes, I would like to start with a comment, your question, and that is related to 3, digitize human foci. When I read that, I wonder how much we can really trust the machine readable, the machine kind of searchable outcome. So I think what is quite important to understand is what needs to be done by humans and what can be done by machines, in order to not trust too much. Well, I don't know if it's trust too much the machines or not. So we have a lot here also in the other points about kind of co-development of, for example, the search engine and stuff like that. There are requests to that. So my question is really, how much can we rely on this machine readable content? And how can we best approach that?
Maybe Pierluigi, who was part of the Data and Information Management Group, could respond to that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like any technology, that will always just help us do work a bit faster, right? So we don't know how much we can trust it until we test it. But at the very least, what we're doing there is just better structuring our information, better structuring how we write these documents or standard specifications or so. And that, on the one hand, it helps the machines. It also helps us as humans understand where our focus areas are. So can we trust them? Well, we'll have to see. We'll have to see which technologies we bring in, how they react to the actual material being put into the system, and then make decisions from there. So it's something to test. This is how every, let's say, content searching system, like when Google was developing its PageRank algorithm or anything else, right? You have to test it. You have to see how it reacts to your collection of documents, etc. And in the OBPS, we have a very specific collection. So, but the need is still there because the collection is growing beyond the ability of humans to go through it manually, obviously, right? So we don't really have a choice but to try and then see what works and reinforce that until we can increase that trust. But that's also where we need the feedback from the community to let us know, are you getting good results? Does it make sense to you? If not, what's wrong, right? And then we can work from there.
There's hand from Michelle and then Mark.
Regarding additional capabilities for the repository, I'm wondering if this kind of flow chart we would like to design would be, easy to implement and define what are the potential ethics issues. For example, you collaborate with indigenous people. This group, you need to have to comply with OBPS, or you need to find the legislation that is and contact this person or this department, legal department, to have the answer. You know, this kind of meta information that can help someone in the same situation to find quickly the best practices.
Sorry, Michelle, but on which of these 5 were you responding now?
Yes.
Yeah. Which of these 5 were you commenting on?
I was commenting, I was willing to add a 6th point, maybe regarding
because ethics is coming back in one of the next questions.
Okay,
but could I propose that I think that fits into 3 also, because that flow chart is a focus on the ethical considerations or so. So I think that's the intersection of the ethics point with number Q1.3. I think we can work with that.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to take a question from Mark, Peter?
Sure.
I think looking at point 4, where the question about version control, I can tell you that the repository does manage version control. We update Cortad manuals every few years, and it's a done deal. Thank you.
And, also from the tech side, yeah, we're upgrading that capacity in the next round of upgrades for the archive. So it'll be finer grained, and hopefully that's a theme we'll continue into the future.
Good. Frank would like to speak.
Yeah, a question for Michelle and Peter, maybe Pierluigi. So in terms of endorsement, if you create trust and uptake by the community, obviously this has to have an element of ethics. I don't think that we have time to get too deep into this right now, but is there a quick recommendation on how you bring that into the endorsement process?
I don't know, we have to think about, because it depends how you will proceed the endorsement.
Okay. Well, there is, like I said, there are two elements that are coming a bit later on ethics. Okay, so
yeah,
that's all for this question. Luigi?
Comment from Jens. Comment from Jens.
Yeah, it was also on the endorsement. I'm a little bit surprised to see that endorsement through use isn't being considered, i.e. what do people actually access and utilize. That is a form of endorsement in itself. People will have a tendency to navigate towards the approachable and useful material.
Yes, it's true. And just to interject there, from the OBPS management of those endorsements, the OBPS itself must remain neutral in that regard. But we can identify who is endorsing. So for example, if there's a particular committee or so, we can identify them and link to their endorsement. So the explanation of why they think this is a good or best practice. But overall, it's important to remain neutral because we'll be balancing many communities with very different interests.
Yeah, if I may, I would say also the endorsement is okay, but remember that when you have a specific best practice within a specific community in a specific region, the endorsement really needs to be done by the end users or at some point.
Maybe I add to that, Michelle. So the trust is something that's really important here. And if you have a strong organization that helps you to gain that trust, for example, if that is a document that's endorsed by the Global Ocean Observing System, then this is kind of, it has to go through a structured approach. And then, of course, there's also an element which is more like the public endorsement, which probably you had in mind, which can be, you know, through likes and stuff like that. But this can be quite random and yeah, it must be controlled also somehow. And endorsement itself is really important for the uptake, for the trust and all that stuff. And yeah.
All right, let's go to the second question. So here, how can OBPS collaborate and support the ocean observing and applications communities? And there we had 9, let's say, recommendations. The first, promote activities that develop metadata standards and that provide the tools needed to ease the implementation of those standards. For example, version control, decision trees, and templates, and incentive mechanisms that motivate the sharing of protocols, samples, data, and code. That came from the Omics eDNA group. The second one, we recommend a more formalized group be formed to discuss the viability of this aspect of the model, also as part of a framework for collaboration. That came from the partnership group. Third, develop plans to expand land-based calibration facilities to handle ocean-based radiation sensors. That came from the surface radiation group. Fourth, create the general requirements of UQ in oceanography best practice and develop UQ best practices, use cases, starting with 1 or 2 to serve as an example. And that came from the uncertainty group. Then define a statement that addresses the efforts and key core values for the ocean observation community, again from the Omics group. Then use cases could really be developed from the examples lists listed in this report and demonstrate how the collaborative impact model could be used to develop and build organizations, programs, and projects of all sizes to bring disparate groups together toward the achievement of a shared agenda. Again, partnership group. Then develop recommendations for standardizing modifications to sensor electronics and housing for marine application, and share these recommendations with industry to allow for broader usage of sensors for marine applications. And that came from the surface radiation group. Then intercomparison experiments, develop plans for field intercomparisons of different surface radiation platforms at testbed sites that can act as high quality reference time series. Example testbed sites might include the Lampedusa Oceanographic Observatory, which is 15 kilometers from the Lampedusa Atmospheric Observatory, or the Air-Sea Interaction Tower offshore of Martha's Vineyard, also surface radiation group. And then last, the panel of experts recommends that the best practice framework be explored, featuring the 5 components of a collaborative organizational model as critical elements from the partnership group. You see that some of these are quite specific to a particular observing community. Are there any comments or suggestions on these?
Jens would like to speak.
I was just on the first one. It seems to suggest explicitly that new metadata standards should be continuously developed. Maybe just suggest to incorporate or consider develop or adopt metadata standards. There are a lot of standards out there already.
Over to Pauline.
Sorry, I was just putting in the chat and actually responding to something that Johannes had put in the chat about using a Google type search, and just reminding everybody that there are many individual search parameters and filters that you can use when you're actually using the search interface.
Pierluigi?
Just a question on the partnership interventions. So, so whenever we have a formalized group created, this of course it helps with clarity for a certain subsection of the global community. But we also, again, must be careful not to only have one way of doing things. So I'm wondering how that group would help build a more global community. I don't know if anyone from the partnership group is here, but that's just one of the potential risks I see whenever I see those sort of words. Of course, it's good for structure that's needed, but what's the overall plan of how many formalized groups and how does the OBPS actually relate to those groups? Those are questions that I think we need to think about a little bit. I don't have any answers, just thoughts.
Yeah, this is Andrea. I'm here. Do you want me to respond? I'm happy to.
Yes, please. Please do.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So really, that was just I think everyone on the panel's ignorance of how best practices develops best practices. Our thinking is that this is an important area of concern, and that it probably does need some concerted development and support. And if it's through the best practices framework or group, then that's great. But if it's somewhere else, then it should be done somewhere. And your point's very well taken. Is the idea is that what we're expounding is and trying to promote is that there's better organization and clarity around how groups come together. And so indeed, that needs to be somehow spelled out better for the community so that, especially as the UN decade may bring disparate groups together, that there is, maybe some sort of a way to help them frame themselves or bring themselves together to help them better be successful.
I see. Peter, may I have a short response?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. That's helpful because indeed we're kind of using our best estimation and intuition. But indeed, if there are groups that have studied and truly understand partnership development and building, that would be very interesting to hear about what kind of conceptual framework the OBPS can use to accelerate the convergence that Johannes talked about.
And just real quickly, I'll say with confidence, is this model or this framework is also being supported by Goose in its strategic plan moving forward. As well, it does look like the National Academy of Sciences will promote this as a viable framework. So those are two important endorsements out there in the larger community.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other comments on this question, then we go to the next one. Question 3, what are the key areas for training and education? And how do we deal with regions of limited infrastructure? The recommendations that came out there was, first of all, create dedicated training packages tailored to a specified user group. For example, cheat sheets for each EOV, developed with the EOV panels, elaborated by decision trees, etc. Take 1 or 2 EOV pilots, for example, microbes working with omics, eDNA working group, and develop or allocate to work package 7. Second one, develop best practices compendium on the subject of virtual reality. You may recall that was discussed by the training group. Third, develop best practices on stakeholder engagement. Fourth, develop online training courses as a series on ethics organized by topic, for example, collaboration with indigenous communities, collaboration with fishermen, etc., focused on ocean observations and application community. Then the next, support training and documentation on ethical concerns and provide guidance on ethically, legally, and socially appropriate protocols in different situations. Next, develop and promote the use of the following resources for the marine litter community. First, open access datasets in standardized formats with traceable uncertainties to enable consistent and comparable training of remote sensing algorithms to detect marine litter. Secondly, technical training courses and capacity building initiatives for citizen scientists. And third, a framework for global marine litter model intercomparison. Then next, improve regional implementation and capacity building within the framework of the Ocean Decade actions. Then encourage the development of training materials and or collate existing OBPS to outline effective ocean UQ for each EOV. And these efforts would be led by disciplinary experts. And then finally, integrate OBPS in university curricula. And this could be connected to community review of best practices or the issue tracker. Okay. That is fairly concrete in many cases. Are there any comments?
Over to R. Verkantesan, I think. Arven Kantesan had a comment.
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
Michelle. Yeah.
I think the point 4 and 5 should be combined. It's about the same idea.
Megan, then Claudia, then Frank.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, this is Megan Cronin from the Surface Radiation Group. We submitted one of our top recommendations was develop a decision tree for different surface radiation applications that provide recommendations for choice of sensors, best practices for handling sensors and installation setup, best practice for calibrating sensors and processing, post-processing data, and the sanity checks and tests for goodness of data. Yeah. And all of these are related to training. And
okay.
So I would think they would go here.
Okay, so I'll move that from question 5 then to question 3.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah, I missed that it was in the decision.
Well,
I guess I haven't seen it yet.
No, we didn't get there yet.
Yeah, okay, one place or another.
Well, if you say it's, in training and education, then it belongs here.
Well, it serves multiple purposes, but it certainly does serve the purpose of training and education as well as best practices and decision trees for experts, from novices to experts.
Okay, thank you, Megan.
Okay, over to R. Venkantesan and then Claudia.
Yeah, thank you, Venkat here. I just put a question like, how do you expect the industry to respond for OBPS? Use this as a feedback mechanism as a user, or do you expect them to come as a partner to give their input? So what does OBPS expect from the industry?
Okay, so the question was, what do we expect from the industry? Okay, does anyone want to comment on that?
Well, I can say something on that. From the industry, like what you cited here, Seabird or so, there's nothing actually what we expect except that we host their documents. If they have something like a manual or so that can be hosted, and we can bring it into the attention of the public in order to, for example, use that in the convergence process or in the endorsement process. There's nothing else that we expect. We do not expect some tests or standards or something. I mean, that's up to the groups. That's nothing what OBPS can actually impact, or we are not. This is very important. We are not developing best practices, except best practices for best practices, but not really, right? So that's important to take home. We can only facilitate the use of best practices and also the convergence process. And that's you are the users, and we are the service from us is really to help you with creating these documents and also make it easy to distribute them. And yeah, and I see Jay has another comment on that.
Thank you, Johannes. I do. I want to add to your comment about Seabird and the sensor industry area. Seabird made me very aware that they not only have manuals for training, but when sensors come back for calibration and maintenance, when people attend the training sessions, they learn a lot about the best practices in the community. And so industry can convey their lessons learned from the interfaces with the community as part of their efforts. I wanted to add a second area, and I use fisheries as an example, but any of the working areas could be appropriate. The fisheries community has a lot of best practices, and there are organizations like ICES that aggregate these best practices. And I think collaboration with them and contributions from them can be an important part of our working with industry. So there's a two-way street, both from the observation side, but also from the application side.
Over to Claudia and then Frank.
Okay, thank you. Well, my point is about number 3, develop best practices on stakeholder engagement. I don't really think this falls so much under training on its own. It should be moved somewhere into communication and outreach from the OBPS community. That was my main comment. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll move it there now. Okay.
Over to Frank.
Yeah, thanks. I'm looking at what is now number 6. And I see that I'm glad the fisheries group put this in here, but it really is a cross-cutting element. And one of the things that I would like to suggest is that the regional implementation and capacity building is a place where there's a natural connection to industry, for example, and especially in the context of the decade, I think that we need to really think how we can promote capacity building that is connected to jobs and the economy. And we do too much capacity building that leads to trainees to be better trained, but then they really have no place to land. And so I think that there has to be somehow a linkage to that this capacity building really is fruitful.
Okay, I've added that to 6.
Mm-hmm. I think that came up in the decade meetings too. It's capacity building and retention.
Okay. Okay. So if we're done with this question, we go to the next one. And that is what outreach would be the most effective community engagement and partnerships. We have 10 elements there. First, improved user dialogue, for example, through the annual OBPS workshops to improve awareness, promote convergence and support champions, while also fostering collaborations with key communities and initiatives. Through this, the sustainability of the best practices and their update will be ensured, as the reliance will be on groups rather than single authors. Secondly, involve the fisheries community more actively in OBPS and ensure interoperability of observations and models, including by using a metadata template. Third, define a statement that addresses the efforts and key core values for the ocean observation community. Fourth, establish global coordination of marine litter monitoring under the UN Ocean Decade. We need to correct that. Ocean Decade by implementing the community visions for a global platform for marine litter monitoring and informing action and an integrated marine debris observing system. Then establish a network of networks to promote coordination, for example, hosting in-person workshops and online forums, and to harmonize national initiatives into global synergies. Next, plan for coordination and collaboration between OBPS and US CLIVAR Ocean UQ Working Group. Then continue the conversation and include aquaculture session in the next OBPS workshop. Then strengthen public-private partnerships to share data and information and provide coordination and collaboration for science for management and entrepreneurial endeavors. Then idea of having an ECOP community supporting the OBPS in different work packages, funding for conference attendance, for ECOP reps at meetings and report back to the community. And lastly, develop best practices on stakeholder engagement, which we just moved here from the previous question. Comments and questions, please.
No signals in chat. Oh, there's one from Johanna.
Yes, Thank you, Peter. Quite related to number 5, the establishment of a network of networks to promote coordination. There was a discussion in the training working group about opportunities for mentoring and one-on-one coaching. I wonder if this can be included here, like a matchmaking of experts to ECOP, early ocean career professionals. So
ECOPs, mentoring, you said?
yes, it's mentoring and one-on-one coaching opportunities. Thank you.
Over to Lubna Terhaz and then Frank.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to also include a marine geology session because most of the talks were more about ethics and fisheries and different state, but less of the sessions were talking about marine geology, and it's all, I think it's related to money, to oceans observations. So if you can also include this session in the next.
Sorry, what's the term you used?
Marine geology.
You mean mine geology?
Marine geology.
Marine geology, yes.
Where would that's more the subject area. Where would we add that? Wouldn't that more
or with 7 or with training session also?
Let's see. Would it belong here?
Yes, it could be 2.
So over to Frank, then Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to make a comment here that is, again, a bit of an overarching comment, but here it goes. I was prompted by the number 4, the marine litter, but it really applies to everything. For example, the surface radiation or marine geology. On Monday, we had a chance to watch a really impressive movie, this Albatross, that Ben facilitated for us. And it was a very, very compelling movie that helps us understand that everything that we are doing here is to understand how it affects life. As far as we know, there's life only on Earth. And this is really one of the reasons that we're trying to do this. How is the planet changing? And how are these things that we're doing affecting the planet? And how do we and life in general, in turn, affect climate? So I think litter and litter monitoring has to be tied to the impact on life and how we as a society are involved in this process. But I just want to be sure that we have a way of somehow bringing the concept that we're doing this for a reason. We want to understand how there's ocean best practices for measuring these things, but there's an impact on life and life on the ocean, including us. And so that has to be, there has to be a way to link the marine litter monitoring to ocean life monitoring, for example. I don't know exactly how to do that, but that's going to be a big effort to try to cross-link these working groups.
Okay.
Sorry, over to Mark. And there are 2 chat comments from Cora and Ken, and then Pierre. I'm not sure. Mark, go ahead.
Okay, 2 points for number 6. The U.S. CLIVAR ocean uncertainty quantification effort includes the creation of use cases or examples of uncertainty quantification. And so we will be doing that And the second point is US CLIVAR Ocean UQ also includes training in year 2023. And it's quite obvious that we can do that with the existing tools that Ocean Best Practice Systems provides. Thank you.
Cora and Ken, would you like to speak what you wrote in chat?
I can comment. To number 5, I wanted to extend that the matchmaking process is also interesting for other groups. Now that we are working a lot of interdisciplinary, it's also interesting to have disciplinary experts, not only communicating to ECOPS, but also to any other stakeholders.
Okay.
Ken?
I guess I just wanted to expand on the concept of stakeholder engagement and take that to another level where we don't just solicit opinions from experts or what we consider experts, academics and professionals, but also people who have living, working knowledge of some of these issues that we are talking about, like marine litter or sargassum issues.
So can I write it like this? Ken?
Over to Pierluigi.
So I had a comment on on number 9. In the data and information worlds or informatic sciences, I think that's particularly important because things are moving so quickly that within 2 to 5 years, it's a very different world. And the early career folks, their perspectives are ones that are already different from mid-career people. So that's important. And also it's important because we lose a lot of them. We lose them to private sector because they're very valuable. So we lose their perspectives in the more, let's say, open sense that they could provide it from academia or so. Things are changing, yes, but in general, a lot of that insight is channeled into other industries away from ocean science. So I think it's very important to engage early career professionals, especially in those fast-moving fields that have a lot of private sector interest, because we tend to actually lose that insight. And that's something that we've certainly benefited from during this meeting. My ECOP co-host Jem Serimoisu and myself, acknowledge that on multiple occasions. I learned a lot.
Okay.
Over to Jay.
I'd like to address number 10. We see many statements develop best practices in stakeholder engagement or others, but there's communities in other areas outside of marine that do extensive work in stakeholder engagement. And I would suggest rather than develop, maybe the word is adopt. So adopt and where necessary, develop best practices. And adapt is also, as Francois says, a very appropriate word in this case.
Okay. And we're done with that. Next to question 5. How should we implement new capabilities such as decision trees and best practices convergence? First, an OBPS convergence process, a well-defined path for convergence and maturation of content into best practices, co-developed with user communities and supported by improved community interaction technology. For example, comments, issue tracker of documents, and as an example there, keywords, wish list, document flagging, better analytics. Secondly, linking human and machine narratives, interlink OBPS document management with digital content. Persistently identified versions of documents should be linked with first versions of data and information artifacts via dereferenceable and persistent IRIs, and 2, code holdings via popular management platforms, for example, GitHub. Third, through dedicated technical workshops, harmonize approaches and protocols for each of the relevant global scale indicators, which should be expanded beyond the list of SDG indicators and define the best possible approaches to manage data. And then last, design a flowchart easy to read for each observer to identify what are the potential ethical issues related to research activities with the related ethical recommendations related to these issues. Okay. Questions and comments?
Johannes?
Megan?
I think Megan was.
Okay, this is Megan. Okay, I'm sorry, I kind of piped up earlier in the training session. I asked to move the decision tree recommendation to there. I think it would be better for this training part, if you don't have it already, to have a recommendation under training for using decision trees, and then move our recommendation back here, because it has a lot of specificity about what type of items are included in the decision tree. And so I think that it's more appropriate for this Q5 instead of Q3. Okay, so once again, I think that the surface radiation recommendation for the decision tree should go here. And then under Q3, you should have another recommendation that is more generic about using decision trees if it isn't there already.
Using decision trees for?
For training and education. Develop decision trees for training and education.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, my comment then was to add to number 1, OBPS convergence, I don't know what the right word is here, but it should be convergence facilitating process or convergence encouraging. So it shouldn't make the impression that OBPS is actually doing the convergence process, right? That's the communities. And we just aid, we help, encourage, yeah.
Clean it up later. Okay.
Over to Michelle, then Pierluigi.
Yeah, based on Johannes' comment, isn't it linked also to this endorsement from the Q4, or I do not remember where was the endorsement. Is it related or not? Is it something we can link to help?
Yes, endorsement I think endorsement is always related to convergence, but convergence is not necessarily related to endorsement. So you can also, of course, converge, but then do not have the wish to explicitly endorse document. But a community can, of course, do the convergence process.
Yeah, because for the endorsement, I think we need to define the methodology, and it's not easy, and this should be maybe part of it. And just, Peter, I saw on the Q3, because we have exchanged topics, just to be sure that in question 3, yeah, we have the point 3, you should combine with the point 4 and not 5, because we have removed one now. Just to be sure when you are rewriting. Sorry, it's details, but.
No, thank you. It's helpful. Okay. Back to Q5.
Pierluigi.
So just a quick comment on the first point. That links very much to the one of the previous questions where we talked about the partnership building, right? The conceptual approach towards convergence. I forget which question that was, but I raised a question there too. So links to the let's say theoretical approach of partnership building. Let's see where that was. I think before that.
No, this
no. Here. No, I think it was before that.
Yeah, I think it was in 3.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, there, 5. No, wait, no. Maybe even before that. Let's take one more. It's where we were talking about the collaborative model.
Yeah, it's
Before that.
No, it's number 9.
Oh, there? It was there?
Yeah.
Number 9? Mm-hmm. So yeah, just a link to Q2 number 9.
So which was this one? Which one was again?
5, then we were on 5.
Yeah. Here? Oh, sorry.
No, 5. Next slide. And then, yeah, you've already started it on number 1, links to at the end. At number 1. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Q2 9.
And also to the endorsement, which is Q1.55. If you can add also.
Mm-hmm. I think we'll find many more of these interlinkages as we go through it. But it's good that we have them, because that shows, indeed, it actually shows a kind of convergence in thinking. So very nice to see.
Over to Jay.
Jay?
I'd like to address what was originally question 5, number 3, develop a decision tree for different surface radiations. I think there's a broader need here of develop methods and processes for decision trees that can be widely adopted across the community. And we see that in Sargassum wanting decision trees and OA wanting decision trees, and we will do some pilots, but having a broad training methodology or conceptual process that people can easily adopt would be beneficial.
Okay. Then we go to the last one. That's in addition, what aspects of global support should be engaged by the OBPS and BRAC?
I think Michelle would like to add something.
For the Q5, sorry, time I react. Just maybe I missed it. Is it normal to have in point 3 to have the design the flowchart that is related to technical workshop, or is it?
That was a separate point. Yeah.
That was a separate point. So
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So what aspects of global support should be engaged by the OBPS and best practices more generally? First, interoperability, the ability to exchange and use data from multiple observation systems, the ability to have sensors that are consistently calibrated, the ability to easily use sensors on multiple platforms. Secondly, the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, the role of best practices in supporting the 7 decade goals. Then in terms of training, the support of training in areas of limited infrastructure, resources, methods, and technologies that enable remote and virtual learning. And finally, ethics, effectively engaging multiple cultures, creating best practices in collaboration and engagement. Okay.
So over to Michelle.
Sorry, for the ethics, I would like also to include this, the question of the data. So I don't know, including data processing. I think it's not only when we engage with different culture, it's also how we process data. So I don't know, maybe Pierre-Logie, you have, yeah.
You mean also data
management? Yeah, it's about the collection, but then after the management and it's.
Yeah, that relates to things like licensing and protection of ownership in a shared data environment. We want data to be open, but we also want some kind of responsibility and sense of, again, that preserving a sense of dignity about the data that describes who we are as people and how we interact with the ocean. So indeed.
Okay.
Good.
Anyone else? All right, then we're done with the 6 questions. I don't know if there are any conclusions or that people want to add that we have not addressed. Well, we've all done very well. So I think then it's time for me to end this.
There is a hand from Mark.
Oh, yeah.
I conclude that it's a really good idea to engage early career ocean professionals for all future meetings. The work of the ECOP has been phenomenal.
Yeah.
Over to Frank.
Yeah, we haven't talked much about sponsorship, and I wonder how we get around that. Everybody, and you know, we're all looking for different ways to fund these different aspects and themes. This morning we participated, at least I was in one of these workshops of the UN Decade for, or the UN for Biodiversity, and there were a few philanthropists in the meeting that I wonder how you can approach and bring into this loop.
Pierluigi, then Peter Haugen.
I don't know if Frank, did you want a response on that from the community, or was that an interjection?
It was an interjection because I didn't see it in any of the bullets, but it's something that we need to be conscious about.
I see, okay, yeah. So then one conclusion that I have from this is that there's a lot of overlap and resonance. So I think that's something we have to search for as the OBPS steering committee to look at this exactly, to look, we need to look at where this overlap and resonance is and figure out a joint strategy to try to implement things efficiently with guidance from the community. Maybe that's even a second point, that we've heard these terms like decision tree many times, but I'm sure we have different ideas of what these are. So we need examples. We need examples. We need anecdotes from the community, stories, as it were, user stories, to help us understand what is meant and what is needed.
Over to Peter.
Thank you. Maybe this is more a question than a conclusion, but having worked with fisheries and talking about management advice, the thought occurs to me that, you know, this is an initiative that starts from ocean observations and ocean observing systems. And when we move to societal applications, gradually you pull in other sources of information than ocean observations, like, for example, for fisheries, catch data. And I guess my question is more, perhaps more to the leadership of OBPS, you know, do we foresee that as we move into other areas like ocean energy or ocean other sectors, that so in some way we reach a limit to how far this initiative should go in terms of serving everything that happens in the ocean? Or do we think that it can be developed further into these areas? This is more maybe a question, and try to look into the crystal ball into the future. How will this develop? Because we want the decade in particular to be beneficial to the sustainable development agenda and society at large. And then the whole idea is to combine ocean observations and models and so on with other input. That's how we make it useful. And I think maybe some reflection on how do we work with other inputs, not only practical knowledge and indigenous knowledge, but also other types of things that are needed for these societal benefits to occur. Thank you.
And back to Michelle.
Back to
Michelle?
the point, yes, back to the point that Pierluigi made. I'm also wondering what could be in the future the big ethical issues that people have to face in their research. Then we can try to treat and to find some good practice, recommendations. So I don't know if it's related to the decision tree, but I would be curious and happy to see what you guys are really facing every day.
And over to Pierluigi.
Right. Yes. So in response to Peter's point, so the point just before the ethics one, so in terms of the technology and how we're handling methodological documents, I think that can be scaled across many other communities. But the question is more a human one, right? Do we have links to those communities? Do they feel a similar need of needing to gather their methods and converge them? If those two things are true, I think we can approach them, because then we will find champions inside those communities to use what we're building. I mean, we're certainly happy to do that, I think, and it doesn't cost us much since we're developing that technology anyway. But it's a human question. Also, there was a comment in the chat from Lubna Teruzas, sorry for the pronunciation. So in terms of a platform where all data is stored, that is certainly out of scope of the OBPS, but the methodologies and the reasoning behind that could indeed be stored inside the OBPS. And there are other projects, Peter can say more about those, but there are other projects about trying to link data stores rather than creating one big one, which will be very, very hard to manage and very expensive, linking those that exist. That's just a short intervention there too. Right.
Okay. All right. I think that's...
There is a hand from Jay.
Okay, Jay.
Yeah, I'd like to come back to Peter Hogan's comment. I think I would say two and a half years ago, so in our middle age of OBPS, we recognized that we needed to address the entire value chain. And then went from ocean observations, but lands in the areas of applications and societal impacts. So societal impacts has always been part of the vision. We have a project in from the European Commission called CAPARTIS, which is run out of Norway, relating to Arctic standards and practices. And there are a number of issues that have come up in terms of community engagement, and they include the use of languages beyond English. And in this case, it's indigenous languages of Greenland and Svalbard and other places. And the understanding of how to translate customs that are maybe even just verbal customs into methods and practices that can be documented. And then understanding, as Pierluigi said, how to get the community to engage in that whole process. So, Peter, I think what you're raising is rather fundamental, and we're working to address it, but the answers aren't all clear.
Okay. Good. So I think we we wrap up this session, and Jay, did you want to make a photo now?
Yeah, please. So if everybody could be kind enough to turn on their videos, I'd like to take a picture of the plenary. If you can do that, Venkat, I don't know whether you have that capability. And Frank, could you turn on yours? I will take 2 pictures. I'd like to start if everybody could just look at the camera, and you can smile if you want to. And then I'd like to take one where we show some degree of wave at me or do the equivalent so that we, in fact, see the energies that we have in this. Go ahead and wave and I'll take a picture. Thank you all. I appreciate it. I think what we'd like to do is then summarize the meeting. Are there comments? Let's mute whoever's speaking. Any comments in general about the workshop or reflections that you have in this last 2 weeks of fairly intensive effort? We would welcome any comments now, if you have any. Please raise your hand if you do. Yes, please, go ahead.
This is Megan. I want to thank you for giving us this space to meet, and I really feel like you have helped us move our community forward and build our community. Thank you.
Jim?
I'm really glad to have been part of this whole week. It has taught me a lot, and I got to meet a lot of people that are also having the same issues as me, so I felt less alone, to be honest. So thank you.
Peter.
Yeah, let me just speak on behalf of, of the IOD, which is one of the parent organizations trying to support the OBPS. IOD is traditionally a bit of a siloed program. It's a community of data managers, and often we have big problems trying to communicate with the ocean observation as well as the product and service development communities. And I'm really happy to see that through OBPS, those silos are now broken, and we're getting much more interaction, and we learn a lot from all the participants to these sessions. I also want to thank everybody for working at somewhat inhumane hours throughout this meeting, but I guess it's something we'll all have to get used to in these new times of COVID and even post-COVID probably. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you all again.
Michelle and Carlos,
Michelle?
Pierre, Luigi.
Yes, I just would like to thank Ben Roberts for this good technical arrangement. I think it was really helpful once you get in, and then to be able to all discuss together. So thank you for your platform, your work, your presence.
Well, thank you for your comments. Let me then do the closing statements. I guess we're still in the age of formality where that occurs rather than just disbanding. I'd like to particularly acknowledge, and following on with what Peter Pissierssens said, the NSF for their funding and their continuing sponsorship of this effort, and Bob Houtman in particular for his vision as we move together into what was the future and what is now the present and will be the future. IODE and GUS, we couldn't have done it without you. We are an IOC project, and that's created the stability and the sustainability that we badly need if we're really going to do something in the long term for the community. Those sponsors are invaluable, but the steering group has all been volunteers, and it's amazing what volunteers can do over a number of years to create something for the community. And I'd like to particularly acknowledge some new volunteers, Cora Horstman and Jordan von Stavel, who led the ECOP activities. We started out, we didn't know where it was going, and they created the vision and they created the value. So we will, I hope, permanently have ECOP engaged with us. This has certainly been a very, very valuable opportunity. And then I can't stop there because the leads of each of the working groups were amazing. I mean, think of this not as one workshop, but 11 simultaneous workshops where there were presentations, where there were discussions, where there were reports. And it was an experiment we hadn't tried before, and I hope you found it a success. The subjects, just so you're aware, were chosen because people volunteered. So if you have friends and you're in a community that you want to see participate next year, please volunteer and join us. We would welcome that. And in that sense, most of all, I'd like to thank you, the participants. We expected 150 registrants. We got over 600. We panicked. It didn't know what to do, and Ben saved us. Thank you, Ben. What's more interesting is we had more than 400 individual participants. So it wasn't like people registered and disappeared, but they actively participated, and everybody made a contribution. So as we draw to a close, we hope that you'll think of this as a continuing experience, that you'll find with us mechanisms in which we can do collaborations. And with that, I would like to close the workshop. Wish all of you health and well-being in the future. Thank you for joining us.
Poll, Jay, did you still want to do that?
Yeah, let's do a poll. I guess Ben had suggested that we do a quick poll just to get your reflections on a couple of things, and it is in the link in the chat. I ask each of you, please go to the chat now, and it's in https://bit.ly, and take a second and add your comments there.
Yeah, it's about a minute to complete it, maybe less. There'll be a more detailed follow-up survey going out to everyone, but we really wanted to check in with those of you that were here. Thank you all for staying too through the end. No, that's not it. It's not. No, that's not it. It's in the chat. There's a link there that I just posted. It goes to a Google form.
Oh, I haven't started it.
Someone else must have seen it. I don't know. We have a few co-hosts.
Yeah, it's fine. No, don't worry. There's nothing to start. It's there. It's live. All's well.
I think we actually don't have to stick around while people do that, but we can have a little overtime hangout for anyone that wants to stay. I think a group of us are going to be debriefing, Jay, right, in the side room. But if people do, if we were together in an actual room, you wouldn't all be racing out the door. Some of you might be catching planes and doing that, but others might be lingering and exchanging business cards or whatever, and there are sort of virtual equivalents of that.
But it looks like Peter's already in the bar, so I'm going to follow him.
Yes, exactly. I changed my background. I thought this was appropriate.
That's cool.
With that, I think I'll stop the recording. Cheers.
Thank you, everybody. And